Hello and welcome, Kuzi Mutonga. Thank you so much for joining me for this podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, so Kuzi is my very good friend and to an extent my advisor in, a lot of things in my life. I met Kuzi when I was in Zimbabwe, so that story has since unfolded into a very interesting serendipity. Kuzi is actually currently based in Canada, in Vancouver, and he is a product manager, retail, and angel investor. Him and I, we have quite a lot of conversations about, money, life in general. So in this conversation, I'm going to have a sneak peek of our conversation. So I'm gonna let Kuzi kind of give us a brief introduction. Kuzi, as brief as you can you share with the audience who Kuzi Mutonga is?
Sure, I'd be happy to share. So thank you for having me on the show, Isaac. And I'm Kuzi Mutonga. I'm from Zimbabwe. Been in Vancouver now since 2011. And I'm a product manager. I work for a cryptocurrency exchange called Netcoins. And I've been retail investing and doing a little bit of angel investing over the last few years. And I have a keen interest in entrepreneurship, finance, community building, music, entertainment. So I'm a big lover of all things interesting. And so hopefully this conversation we can learn and talk a little bit more about some of my interests and Isaac's interests as well.
Thank you so much, Kuzi. So Kuzi and I, we also graduated from the University of British Columbia, and I was doing my graduate studies, but I remember we also did the African Business Club, which was, an inaugural forum or platform that we just, wanted to bring the conversation about the opportunities in Africa. Here, that was at that time at the University of British Columbia. So, Kuzi, I know you have had a very illustrious career. Someone of your age, you have had quite, great experience. You have worked for very big and very interesting companies. Do you want to share with us? Probably, there are some people who may want to say, maybe I want to be a product manager one day. How has been your experience and how would one, get such a good opportunity?
Well, that's a good question, Isaac. So the career into product management is unique. Everybody has a unique story as to how they break in. I happen to work in financial technology. So a lot of my experiences before I broke into technology was more on the finance side. So I worked at a hedge fund, right? At a large fund called Orbis Investments. They're quite large. They manage about $35+ billion. I was in the financial reporting team. I also worked in another financial reporting role at another company called Bench Accounting. Over there is where I learned about small businesses. And so the difference between Bench and Orbis, for example, Orbis was focused on the equity markets, whereas Bench was focused on small businesses in the US and Canada. So it was kind of like two different experiences, and I learned a lot about reporting, financial reporting, what makes businesses tick from a different perspective. And then from there, I went and I worked on my own startup, which was a clean energy startup. Did that for like a year and a half with some friends. Then I moved on to a legal technology startup. And I went from being a business analyst into a product manager. So that was an opportunity that I did not expect, but I embraced the opportunity because it was an opportunity to grow within the organization and learn how products are built, digital products are built. So from there, that's where I got a lot of my training. I was mentored by a senior PM that I'm still friends with today. And then I got headhunted into the company I've been at most recently, which is Netcoins, as a product manager. So I've been at Netcoins now for just over 2 years. And so my experience as a product manager has been just over 3.5 years as a PM. So it's really interesting because you get a chance to work with your colleagues cross-functionally in order to build digital products. So what does that mean? I work with the software engineers every day. I work with the designers. I work with marketing. I work with the business and strategy team. I work with compliance. I work with customer success. So I'm working with everybody to make sure that we build and maintain a product that is compelling for our users. And I've had experiences in both B2B, business to business, and B2C, business to customer. So I have a little bit of experience building products for both types of markets and users.
Yeah. And all these opportunities, just as a follow-up, Kuzi, have been primarily based in Canada, but I know some of the companies that you worked, they are actually multinational corporations. In other ways, they work, in other jurisdictions outside of Canada, right?
That's correct. For example, Orbis was a global fund. They had 8 offices, right? And so that was a interesting experience because I got a chance to meet people from all over the world. So I had
Yeah.
colleagues who would come from Japan, from the UK, from South Africa. I was
Mm-hmm.
at San Francisco. So they have offices all over,
Mm-hmm.
Luxembourg, Bahamas. And then with Netcoins, where I work currently,
Mm-hmm.
Netcoins also has a business that's in the States as well. So I have
Mm-hmm.
colleagues that are in the States and Canada, but I was part of helping the company expand into the States and building the products that we're currently
Mm-hmm.
using in the States. So it's been a good experience working with companies that have multiple offices because you get a chance to meet all kinds of people and you
Mm-hmm.
learn about different types of users and markets.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very interesting thing. I was, thinking about this the other day, when I was, doing my second master's degree at the University of British Columbia. Sometime when I was walking around in the building of the, faculty that I was in, I could meet colleagues, some of them they were from all parts of the world, some of them they studied at Harvard and all over the world. But sometimes it's very easy to overlook that, not to say, there's anything really special about going to Harvard that someone who can go to other universities can't do, but it's kind of like a network. And also, you learn from people from different backgrounds, from different diversity. So it's really interesting. I know you travel a lot, and you have also traveled, across many countries. So, what is that experience? What have you learned from that as a global citizen? About opportunities in Africa. What can you share with the audience here?
So that's a great question. So my life has been punctuated by travel my whole life.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I'm from a family that's from Zimbabwe, but I was
Hmm.
born in the Ivory Coast. So from
Hmm.
day one, I always had opportunities to speak new languages, meet new people, connect in a different way from most people that would grow up in Zimbabwe, for example. So
Hmm.
my whole life has always been punctuated by travel, and I've always found
Hmm.
that to be a constant pillar in my life.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why is because I went to international schools my whole life. So when you go to
Yes.
international schools, you have classmates from all over the world. So you'll have a classmate from Mongolia or a
Yeah.
classmate from the US, classmate from the UK, classmate from South Africa. And so I was always used to having a very diverse classroom, right?
Hmm.
So what I've realized about traveling and people is that the power of human connection is rooted in your ability to communicate, right? The more languages you
Yes.
speak, the more people you
Yeah.
can connect with. And so I myself, I happen to speak four languages: English,
Yeah.
French, Spanish, and Shona. And that has allowed
Yeah.
me to connect with all kinds of people from all over the
Yes.
world. And in all corners of the continent. I'm lucky to have been to all four corners of Africa. And so,
Yes.
having had that experience, and a father who also worked and traveled a lot, he really
Yes.
shaped a lot of my experience
Hmm.
and by the stories he would tell. He could tell me a funny story about somebody in Sierra Leone, or a very
Yeah.
funny story of an experience he had in Ethiopia, or meeting somebody in South Africa, right? And so you start to notice that
Yes.
human beings are more similar than we are dissimilar. And your
Yes.
ability to connect with the other human beings is rooted in your ability to communicate, right? And as I think
Exactly.
Nelson Mandela once said, if you speak to somebody in their mother
Yes.
tongue, you connect with their heart. Whereas if you speak to them in
Mm.
English, you connect with
Hmm.
their mind. So if you want to connect with somebody's heart, speak to them in their mother tongue.
That's so powerful, Kuzi. Speaking of which, I know you have a very keen interest also in opportunities in Africa. So, what opportunities do you see as far as, in the emerging markets? What are the areas that you see as potentially, lucrative opportunities for someone, let's say someone who wants to go and invest in Africa? And of course, Africa is very big. The last time I checked, it is 54 countries,
Hmm.
very broad, diverse, and different cultures. So I just want to put it out there that, Africa is not just one country.
Hmm.
Yes. So over to you, Kusi.
Okay, great question, Isaac. So, interestingly enough, I just came back from Africa. I was there for
Mhm.
5 months. I was in Zimbabwe, but
Mhm.
even within the context of being in Zimbabwe, working remotely online, because I
Mhm.
was dodging Canadian winter. The winter is cold here in
Yes.
Canada. I was enjoying the sunshine in Africa whilst working online, and I got a chance to travel in Zimbabwe and also to South Africa. I spent some time
Yeah.
in Cape Town and Johannesburg, and that
Yeah.
really was a fantastic experience because I was able to learn about just opportunities across different segments. So, for
Mhm.
example, in Zimbabwe, every week that I was there, I tried my best to meet with a real estate developer.
Mhm.
Right? I was there for about 5 months. And in that time, I learned so much about real estate, which I did not know before. I never was somebody who was really
Yes.
interested in real estate, but suddenly I've developed a new interest because I've realized
Yeah.
that as populations continue to grow across Africa, that is
Mhm.
a common pattern. It's a common thread. So
Yes.
technology is one angle, which is the space I work in day to day. But what people forget is that with Africa's population booming, Africa is going to have the greatest population shift in the next 30 years, right? And if you think about that population shift, all these people are going to need places to live, right? So you think about the business opportunity around that, there's real estate, there's everything to do with construction, so materials related to construction. There's opportunities around education because children need to be educated. There's
Yes.
opportunities around waste management because people need waste management. There's opportunities around electricity because people need electricity. There's opportunities around agriculture because people need food. So as populations continue to grow, demand for core goods and services, right, will continue to grow and expand as well. So I think there's a huge opportunity in Africa for that to be the case. A good example is there's three cities that were highlighted in I think it was a McKinsey report I read a few years ago. They said Lagos, Kinshasa in the DRC, and Addis Ababa in Ethiopia are the three biggest cities in Africa and will continue to be the three biggest cities for the next 20 to 30 years. Just focusing on real estate and the ancillary services around real estate could be a ginormous opportunity for anybody who's looking to do business because everybody needs a place to stay. So why not stay at a
Very
residence
true.
or property that's owned by you?
Yes, thank you so much. And probably, do you have any? Because a lot of people they think like, okay, how do I get, the capital? Let's say if I want to get into real estate. So do you have some potential funding sources that you can think of, to potentially leverage on those opportunities? Because, a lot of people think that funding, but from running my own business, I've also realized that funding is just one part of the bigger puzzle. You need human resources, you need also to allocate, resources, capital, labor, and all these factors of production, efficiently if you are to be successful in whatever business that you'll be working on. Or do you have kind of like, I know you're an angel investor, you like, private equity. Can you speak a little bit to that if you can? Kuzi?
It's a very good question. So it really depends on what your goals are. I always say your goals determine the funding sources that are available to you, and it also depends on what stage you're at, right? So
Yes.
your stage of development influences the types of funders who will help you, right? So for
Okay.
example, if you're a startup and you're brand new, right? Then you're probably going to need to put up some of your own capital, whatever it is that you've
Yes.
saved, or you're going to have to raise money from friends and family. You may need to put up some collateral in order for you to be able to get a loan from the bank. That's an option,
Yes.
right? But if you're building something that maybe has a technology angle, then maybe you can go out and reach out to an angel investor or a venture capitalist. I'm particularly interested in venture capital. And so that's a space that long term I'd love to contribute to because what I've realized is in order for employment to continue to grow, we need more people creating companies and creating solutions to the world's problems, right? Without entrepreneurship, we don't have jobs, right? Or there's a limited number of jobs. Government can supply jobs, but we still need entrepreneurs providing the majority of the jobs because the government can't provide all the jobs, right? So
Yes.
that's why I'm a big fan of venture capital and why I think it's important to support venture capital and entrepreneurs or
Sorry to
anybody that has an
interject,
idea.
Kuzi. Do you mind also elaborating what venture capital is? Because I'm thinking, let's say I have a kid who is watching from India, Zimbabwe. They may not have, an idea of what, a venture capital is. Not to say they can't know, but so that at least we are at the same page, just to be
Sure.
sure.
So, venture funding or venture capital is a subset of a category of funding known as private equity. One of the things I always recommend for anybody who wants to learn anything about finance or finance, study accounting. Right? Accounting and finance are essentially related, but accounting is the language of business. So if you want to understand how a business works, how it
Yeah.
keeps its records, how much
Yeah.
money is going in and out of the business, how much expenses are being managed, how funding is being managed, it's really important to understand accounting because accounting is the language that's used to communicate the performance of the business, right? So we'll start there. Now, within the context of accounting, there's two sources of funding. There's debt and then there's
Yeah.
equity. Debt being a loan, right, which
Yeah.
is repayable to the
Yes.
investor or the lender, and then equity being funding that goes into the business or capitalizes the business. And in exchange, somebody receives a piece or a stake as a shareholder. So each shareholder has equity in the business. So venture capital is a form of funding that provides equity funding to people that have startup ideas. Now,
Yes.
typically, a venture capitalist is looking for ideas that have serious potential for return at scale. And the reason why that is because they're funding a lot of different ideas, and most ideas, unfortunately, don't make it. But the ones that do make it need to do extremely well to cover the cost or the expense of all the other ideas that failed or didn't quite make it, right? So
Yeah.
typically, a venture capitalist is looking for 100 times their money, right, on
Yes.
a successful investment. If you think
Yes.
about Google, if you think about
Yeah.
Apple, if you think
Yes.
about your favorite technology companies,
Yeah.
almost all of them
NVIDIA.
were funded through venture capital before they became public companies on the stock market.
Interesting. Um, Before we get into the personal finance and the stock market and the cryptocurrency, I know a lot of people they do crypto, right? I thought, also if you could kindly share, Kuzi, if you will, about your experience, like how has it been like living in Canada? I know you've traveled across the world, but
Mhm,
also, even though you were born in Ivory Coast, you lived in Zimbabwe and other parts
mhm,
of the world, including even Tunisia.
mhm,
Um, like what was it when you came? Because for me there was this vision that I could see the narrative on social media, on the TV, about what Canada, or
mhm,
America was. But when I came here, the reality is different. In some cases still true or
mhm.
similar, right? So what was your experience when you landed at YVR, when you came, to do your undergraduate, and how has that shifted over time? Because now I'm aware, we are both citizens of Canada as well.
We are. Yeah.
So, time is elapsed, right?
Mhm.
And, things can change if you want to elaborate.
Awesome. So it's a very good question. I was actually having this conversation with somebody the other day. So
Hmm.
the reality of living in Canada is very different from what I thought it would be,
Hmm.
especially Vancouver in particular, because Canada is a varied country. Toronto is
Yes.
different from Vancouver, and Vancouver is
Yeah,
different from Montreal. Right? Those are some of the big cities here.
for sure.
And when you think about Canada, I think the people here are very polite. The people here are quite
Yes.
considerate. I would say the economy is very developed. It's a land of opportunity. However,
For
it's not a
sure.
bed of roses, right?
Yes.
Society here functions on efficiency and it functions on productivity. And that was
Yes.
probably the biggest difference I noticed between Zimbabwe
Hmm.
and Vancouver, Canada. It's because over here, your time is truly an asset. Whereas
Yes.
when I'm in Africa, the emphasis on time is not nearly as strong, right?
Yeah.
Time is 24 hours everywhere, but the
Yes.
appreciation of time is different over here compared to
Yes.
when I'm in Africa, and in particular, the expectations around how you use your time. So how
Yes.
productive you are, right?
Exactly.
How prepared you are. For example, going to university, since we both went to UBC, I was like, you can attest
Yes.
that when you're preparing
Yeah.
for an economics class,
Yeah.
you must be well prepared, right? You cannot
Yeah.
sort of wait for the answers to come to you. You must go out there and pursue answers
Yes.
to your questions before any test or any assignment comes back.
Yes.
So you have to be very proactive here. That's the biggest
Yes.
difference. The other thing I noticed, which is a huge shift, which I
Mm.
think is something I didn't think about when I was young, I didn't consider how weather would have an impact on me.
Hmm.
So, for example, Zimbabwe is sunny, 90% of the
Yeah.
year. It does not rain
Yes.
much, and if it rains for like an hour, and then the
Yeah.
rain goes away.
Hmm.
Whereas here in Vancouver, it can rain for weeks on end, or it can rain in such a way that you don't even see the sun that day. So
Yes.
I noticed that it had a big impact on my mood, right? My
Yes.
personal mood. And so that's
Yes.
something I had to learn how to manage when I moved to Canada. So,
Yeah.
looking back, I didn't know any of those things before I got here. And I
Hmm.
wish I had thought about that more as an 18-year-old before, I applied to come to university because weather has a big impact on your day-to-day experience.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much, Kuzi. And you reminded me of the time, I did my first degree, Bachelor of Science degree in economics at the University of Zimbabwe, and then I got the MasterCard Foundation scholarship. And how I got it, I will share this as a story because it's an inspiration, maybe to someone out there. I went to school with a guy, he's my friend now, what's called Washington Murisa. He's actually based in Dubai now. So he was, tutoring, some kids in Zimbabwe, some students who wanted, extra lessons. He was my classmate. So I see him, I was walking in town and I said, Washington, how are you? He was like, Isaac, good to see you. I'm actually going to, buy my airplane ticket here for me to fly out to Dubai. But I was teaching these kids, do you want me to recommend you? Because I was wondering, I just want to make sure that I can, recommend someone. So to cut a long story short, I was recommended to teach Kuzi mathematics, including statistics, because he was doing IBM. It's an, syllabus that is, mostly done international schools. So I remember the first day I met Kuzi, he was kind of testing me, asking me questions, I guess, Kuzi, you can speak more to that. You wanted to test if I knew differential equations or, But
That's funny.
one
Yes.
thing that I knew from the beginning, and that's a principle I've maintained even because I had the privilege of even being a, teaching assistant here at the British Columbia when I was doing my graduate studies. I can't know everything. So I was always honest with my student to say, you know what, if I don't know the answer off the top of my mind, I don't know. But for sure, using my experience, I can, research. Of course, there's internet, there's a lot of things, but I can also use my thinking. But also the other key thing that I learned when I came to Canada is that you really have to think outside the box because it's not just about memorizing. So from that experience, I was always honest and upfront with Kusi to say, you know what, I may not have all the answers to your mathematical problems, but for sure, I can do my homework, and if I don't have the answer today, tomorrow, I will, bring the answer. And to cut a long story short, when Kuzi came to Canada, he saw an opportunity that he believed that I would be a good fit, the Mastercard Foundation scholarship. And, you know, I was, like I applied, I got in, and that's how, this, friendship has really thrived. And we have worked on quite a number of projects with Kuzi, including, like I mentioned earlier on, the African development, the African Business Club, where we brought in speakers from all over, North America and Africa at UBC. That was in 2015, yes. And that has since continued because that's a legacy that myself, Kuzi, as the founder, and many other, teammates, from Simon Fraser University and other, institutions also participated, to build that. So I just wanted to put it out there. Now that I've said that, Kuzi, you have spoken about your experience, your transition. What in terms of personal finance, you have
Mhm.
been investing in the stock market. What
Yeah,
has been your strategy? And of course, this is not to be taken as investment advice. These are just our personal experiences. Yeah.
for sure, definitely. I agree with Isaac there. This is non-investment advice. This is purely our own personal experiences. So, in terms of how I approach sort of retail investing, let's talk about that because angel investing is very different from retail investing.
Yes.
But
Mhm.
retail investing, how I approach that experience is I approach it from more of a fundamental analysis perspective.
Mhm.
So I like understanding the fundamentals associated with a company, right?
Yes.
What is it that makes them tick? How do they generate revenues? How are the revenues trending? What are some of the macro indicators around the business? Are there headwinds? Are there tailwinds? If there's a
Mhm.
headwind, you know that there's a growth potential that's going to continue. If there's a
Mhm.
tailwind, it means that they're probably going to first face some adverse challenges in the market, which could potentially impact their business
Mhm.
negatively. Right. Another thing I look at is what is their concentration of customers. So, for
Yes.
example, is most of the revenue derived from one or two contracts, or is the risk
Mm.
spread out? Right. So concentration risk is something I look at. Another
Mhm.
thing I look at is how has the business evolved over time? Right. So are
Mhm.
they vertically integrated? What sort of integrations do they have? Are they horizontally integrated?
Mhm.
What is the management capability, leadership
Mhm.
capability? What is their strategy? Like, what is their
Yes.
actual point
Mhm.
of differentiation in the market? What's their selling point, their USP, unique selling
Mhm.
point? And when I look at all those variables, then I try and come up, with some sort of valuation of what I think
Mhm.
the company is worth. And that
Mhm.
requires, reviewing financial
Some work.
statements, looking at past annual filings,
Mhm.
coming up with your own version of a model,
Mhm.
and then being able to kind of estimate what you think the company is worth and if you think it's undervalued, right? Is the intrinsic value
Mhm.
below sort of current market levels, or is the intrinsic value, sorry, rather well above the current market value,
Mhm.
right? Because if there's potential above the current market value, then you
Mhm.
think you're buying cheaply. So going back to The Intelligent Investor, that famous book from
Mhm.
Benjamin Graham,
Yeah.
the market has its vicissitudes. The market moves, right? In a way
Yes.
that's rational or irrational. It can move in either
Mhm.
direction. So it's up
Mhm.
to you to kind of come up with some sort of fundamental value
Mhm.
of a company before you invest. Now, that's when you look at individual companies.
Mhm.
Personally, the approach that I take to investing is a little bit different from that. I
Mhm.
typically buy indices, so indexes,
Mhm.
right? So the NASDAQ has been a
Through
favorite of
exchange
mine.
traded funds.
Exactly, through exchange traded funds, ETFs. Now, for me, the NASDAQ has been a popular one for me because I work in the technology space. I
Mhm.
understand it. I'm not an expert in all things technology, but working with software every day, I recognize that it's been the one kind of innovation that has impacted the productivity of the world drastically for the last 30 to 40 years. Software has been the biggest advancement in human productivity in a long time across all sectors, right? So I'm bullish on technology and what it's been able to do for many. And that's one of the reasons why I invest primarily in technology companies. Now, occasionally, I'll take a position in a company that's not a pure technology company or not part of the tech industry, if I think that there's potential. So, for example, real estate investment trusts, right? I may maintain a position in that. Right? And what I'm looking for there is what type of tenants do they have, right? What's the stability of the cash flow? What's their yield, right? And so I've been talking to a lot of different REITs recently, talking to them, trying to understand their strategy, their asset composition, and just their cash flow profile, so I can think about whether or not I'd want to invest. Because that's another way to diversify your risk. You don't want to only own technology 100%. You need to think about other sectors of the economy as well and how they can play into a broader kind of portfolio management strategy. Right?
Interesting. Kuzi, for me, I like to play with the S&P 500 indices, exchange traded funds, basically the top 500 companies in the US, because they come from different sectors: technology, consumables, banking, as they call them, financials, healthcare, but it is about 30% weighting in technology. So you have companies like Apple, Microsoft. I think Microsoft is the one that is, that is the highest weighting on most of the ETFs that I like to do. Somewhat, the technology cast ETFs like QQQ have performed better than SPY, or if over the long term. So, in that regard, because this might sound like it's very complicated, think of it this way, Kusi. There's someone in Chad or in Burkina Faso or in India, right? How can we say this in as simple as possible? If someone then wants to invest, the first thing I know is you need a brokerage account, right?
You
So,
do. You do need a book.
yes, yeah. Do you
So
want
there's
to
three
speak to
parts to
that?
this, is what I would say. Okay, so step number one, before you consider investing, you need to think about what you want to invest in, right? Before you even set up the brokerage account, think to yourself, why do I want to invest and what do I want to invest in? That's step number one. I highly recommend Peter Lynch's book because he recommends that people do research on what it is that they consume every day. So if you own an iPhone, if you own a Samsung, do
Yeah.
research on Samsung, do research on Apple. If you're already buying the product, why not consider investing in it? Now, obviously, this is not
Yes.
investment advice.
Yeah.
However, look into the things you consume every day, the things you use every day,
Yes.
because the
Yes.
world around you is filled with products that were created by other people,
Yeah.
right? So that's the
Yes.
first thing: is what do you want to invest in, and why do you want to invest in it?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Then step number two is how do I set up an account,
Yeah.
right? And how do I make sure that my account has all of the specificities that I need in order to be able to buy stock, right? So to your point, you can go to a brokerage, right? And there's different brokerages houses that are out there. You can download an app, right? For example, you can download an app like a Robinhood app, for example, or Wealth Simple here in Canada. Those are apps that allow you to invest in stock, or it allows you to invest in other forms of alternative currencies, like
Securities. Yeah.
cryptocurrencies or things like that. So it's up to you, whichever one you want to use, but just make sure you have a secure platform that allows you to deposit funds, that allows you to trade, and that allows you to withdraw your funds, right? And then the other thing, which is super important, is make sure you meet your financial obligations from a tax reporting perspective. So just make sure that whatever you do on the brokerage, at the end of the year, tally up your gains, your losses, and make sure that it appears on your income tax filing. That's what I
Yeah.
recommend. So we said step number one, what do you want to invest in and why? Think about everything that's around you. Step number two, think about the brokerage or the platform it is that you want to use, right? Do research, be diligent, do all of that.
Yes.
And
Very
then the
important.
third thing that you need is you need income.
Yes.
You need to make sure that you save before you invest. Right? I always say to people, the prerequisite for investing is saving. Until you
Yes.
build a habit of saving, you cannot invest. So make
Yes.
sure you save consistently. Then the habit of investing should also become a consistent habit because you're used to saving, right? Because life is full of ups and downs and surprises, as we know. An emergency fund can help tremendously with that, right? And it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be a ton of money,
Yeah.
but just make sure that you're not always pulling out your money from the stock market because
Yes.
ideally you want your money to grow. So, for example, I'll give you a simple example. Last year, I made a decision between August and December to save a lot of my money. So, half of my paycheck would go automatically towards a tax-free savings account.
Mm-hmm.
And within that half, 30% of it was the tax-free savings account. And then the other 20% was my retirement account.
Automated. That's what I'm
Automated.
getting, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes, would automatically go. And automation solves a lot of headaches because you don't have to physically do it. It's an instruction that you can request from your bank, and it goes right away into the account.
Yeah.
And each time that money would go, it would automatically buy
Yeah.
technology stock, right? Or whichever
Yeah.
stock it is that I requested. But it would buy the index, and it would
Mm-hmm.
continuously buy. So every
Yeah.
paycheck, I know that money is going towards the index. And just
More
by
like
doing that,
robo investing, right?
yeah, robo investing is a form of doing that. But just by taking that one action, right? Between the month of August
Mm-hmm.
and December, I was able to save over $13,000 just
Yeah.
by saving and investing, saving and investing. And that money is growing. And I make sure that I never touch those
Yeah.
funds, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that the funds are meant to grow. That's the why
Yeah.
they're there. They're not
Yeah.
there for me to withdraw every day or anything like that. So that's why I
Yeah.
always recommend to people, make sure you have some savings first, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then focus on investing because you want your savings and your investments to grow uninterrupted. So.
Exactly. Warren Buffett always says, I think rule number one for compound interest, never interrupt it. So the point being, let it grow. And most of the time, sometimes it's like someone would say, maybe you're speaking from a privileged point of view. I'm, living paycheck to paycheck. I can't even, do that. But
For
what
sure.
I can say is that you have to do something about your life. Whether you have to learn a new skill. Now with the internet, you can learn coding even through maybe at Massachusetts, MIT, or Harvard. There are a lot of other free online,
Mm-hmm.
courses. And the truth of the matter is that sometimes you just have to work. You save. You
Mm-hmm.
get data, and then you intentionally do that. It's not something that is really complicated, but also, self-directed investing, as we are talking about here, is not for everyone. Some people, they are happy to go to the bankers and then they say, financial advisor, this is my money. Can you take out money? You give them instructions. You ask questions and make sure you understand the fees, that are being charged. With that, what are the personal, finance lessons that you have learned, since you came to Canada, like things like credit card
Sure.
usages and debt?
So,
You want to
so
share that?
I've made every mistake you can think of when it comes to personal
Yeah,
finance. So that's why I'm happy to share,
yeah,
my own experiences. So the first thing I discovered is that, debt is not your friend, right?
yeah,
In general. And by that I mean for consumption
yeah,
purposes.
yes,
So when you're looking to buy day-to-day expenses, things like groceries, things like your
mm-hmm,
bus pass, things like, just a simple, meal with a friend or a coffee shop, right?
mm-hmm,
You don't want to be using debt for that. The
mm-hmm,
reason being, anytime you maintain a balance on your credit
yeah,
card, you're being
mm,
charged interest, typically 20% or more on any outstanding balance, which is why
yeah,
it's really important to settle your balances every month, right?
yes,
There was a time I discovered that I had a really low credit score, and it was
mm-hmm,
because I hadn't paid off my balances. Now, this is
mm-hmm,
something I didn't know because I thought, oh, okay, I'm just paying off what I can, or I'm paying off
mm-hmm,
the minimums.
the
So,
minimum balance.
yeah. But every time you're maintaining a balance, the bank is making money off of you. So you need to
Yeah,
be very disciplined about paying off your balances. So one of the things I discovered is you can actually set up an auto payment function,
yes,
typically at most of these apps, which means that whatever your balance is at the end of the month, it will take money from your account and automatically pay it off.
yeah,
If assuming you have the funds in your checking account, it'll automatically go and
mm-hmm,
pay off the money that's in your credit card. This is very, very
excellent.
important because if you're
Mm-hmm,
not disciplined with balances, number
mm-hmm,
one, the
mm-hmm,
bank will charge you a lot of interest. That's the first thing. Number
mm-hmm,
two, it will lower your credit score, especially if your utilization is high. So when you think about credit, the whole
mm-hmm,
premise of credit is, are you somebody that is trustworthy from a lending perspective? That is really why
yes,
credit exists. It exists
yes,
for the bank to make money. But what they're
yeah,
testing is they're testing to see if I give you this money in large sums or even in small sums,
mm-hmm,
will you pay it back in a timely fashion? Right? If you're
yes.
very consistent and you
It's
pay back
business.
consistently, yes. If you're very consistent and you pay back that money consistently, you have a very good credit score. The other thing is, if your utilization is low, meaning that if you, let's say you have $100,
Mm-hmm,
if you're consistently using 90 of the $100, but you're paying back the
mm,
90, your credit
yeah,
score will still be low because
yes,
they're saying this guy uses almost all the money. So if something were to happen to your job, to a medical emergency, something like
yes.
that, then maybe you wouldn't be able to pay back after you've used the 90. So they would rather lend to somebody who uses 30 and pays back the 30 than somebody
Yes.
who uses 90 out of the 100 and pays back the 90.
Yes.
So utilization is a big piece of how they review your credit score, in addition to
Yeah.
your outstanding balance. So what I've learned is that it's important not to keep outstanding balances, and it's important to keep your utilization at or below 35%, ideally, right? If you
Yes.
can not use more than 35% of the credit that you have access to, you'll be
Yeah.
fine, right? And
Yes.
just make sure you pay your balances on time, and you will
Yeah.
have a high credit score.
Interesting, because here most of the things, are bought on credit. Like, think of it, if you want to buy a house, through a mortgage, you go to the bank, you get
Yeah.
a loan. I spoke about it in my previous episode, actually the first episode with Eddie, that here in Canada you get 5-year terms, and for if you want a house, but it falls back to your credit, because you are talking of houses. Last time I checked, here in Surrey, you're talking of maybe $1 million for 3-bedroomed house.
Wow.
1 million Canadian dollars. So you're talking
Mhm.
of probably 700,000 US dollars. How many people can have that cash? So most people, they then go to the bank, they leverage, they say, okay, you have 20% down payment, and that's the logistics. I'm pretty sure in most advanced countries that's what happens, right? So what it means, over the amortization period, like 25 to 30 years, you will be paying those monthly payments. But of course, the good thing is, in most cases, at least in Canada, the house prices on average, the return has been positive, at least an average of about 8%, 8.8% nationally. Canada
Mhm.
is very big, 10 provinces. So you may find that in Alberta province or in British Columbia, the house prices are quite different, but it's very spacious. About 80% of the country, I believe, is forests and oceans, right? So that's something that I've learned, that credit, just, even if you want to use cash, in my case, I pay right after using, the credit card. I pay off the balance. So I find it very interesting. Now, before we wrap up, Kuzi, I know you are working in the crypto space. It would be remiss of us in this conversation to not talk about crypto. And yeah, one of those people who started investing in crypto, I remember when we were living in Surrey, you started
2017.
investing in crypto, and I had no clue what crypto was, right? So can you
2017.
kind of like share, what are your thoughts about crypto?
Sure. So it's a good question. So I do work at a cryptocurrency exchange currently. So I'm fortunate to have kind of direct insight now. But yeah, I started learning about crypto back when I was at that hedge fund in 2017. And so that's when I kind of learned a little bit about crypto. I saw the first kind of bull run where the market
Hmm.
went up. And that's
Hmm.
kind of what piqued my interest. But I got in just before that market run up.
Hmm.
So it was very interesting to kind of see human
Hmm.
psychology, market
Yes.
dynamics, the bullishness around crypto. I'll share a few interesting stats about crypto. A lot of people don't realize this, but
Hmm.
crypto is a form of alternative payments or alternative money movement, right? From
Yes.
traditional kind of central bank or core banking methods, right? It's
Hmm.
really just technology that exists to
Hmm.
facilitate the movement of money across sort of a new technology stack. So
Blockchain.
yeah, so the blockchain underpins the whole kind of ecosystem, and it's essentially a public record, a public ledger of all
Hmm.
transactions. But the reason why this works is because transactions are happening on a digital network, right?
Hmm.
And so this digital network needs a method of validating and authenticating transactions, right? The same way you would
Hmm.
authenticate a transaction with your bank. This
Hmm.
network has some embedded kind of mathematics and embedded encryption in it, which is why it's called
Yeah.
cryptocurrency, right? It's
Yes.
cryptographically secured, and then
Hmm.
part of unlocking the transaction or
Hmm.
validating the transaction is something
Hmm.
known as crypto mining. The mining is what then is able to
Hmm.
decode the
Hmm.
cryptography to then say,
Hmm.
yes, this transaction is valid or this
Yes.
transaction is invalid, right? So the
Hmm.
blockchain is the infrastructure that underpins a lot of cryptocurrency, and it's what allows you to see whether or not a
Hmm.
transaction really did happen or not, right? Now, broadly
Hmm.
speaking, I will say this about crypto. A lot of people don't realize that each successive year, right? So since it started in 2008, so
Hmm.
crypto has been around for about 16 years, right? So it's not
And
something.
it's not investment advice.
Yeah, this is not investment
Sure.
advice, but cryptocurrency has been around in since 2008, right?
Hmm.
So a lot of people have said that, oh, it'll disappear, it'll disappear, it'll disappear. It hasn't yet, right? And I suspect it'll continue to grow, which it seems to have done so far. in terms of adoption and popularity, right? Because a lot of people don't understand it because there's a lot of technology behind it and there's a bit of complexity there. However, at its core, a lot of people don't realize that Bitcoin each year has reached a higher low, meaning that the low point from the previous year, right, in
Yeah.
the subsequent year, it reaches I guess, a higher point than the previous year. And this has been for the last 16 years. Now, obviously, this is not investment advice, but
Yes.
what I'm trying to get people to see is that the adoption is growing, right?
Yes.
Which means that if the currency didn't have, I think, any legs, chances are
Yes.
it would fall much, much lower than where it started,
Yeah.
right? So it continues to grow, is my point, right? Like I
Yeah.
said before, it's not investment advice.
Yeah.
Each
Sure.
year it continues to grow in terms of
Yeah.
adoption, and it's
Mm-hmm.
reaching different levels each year. So uh, I'm very curious to see what happens next. Nobody knows the future, but
Exactly.
what I can tell you about crypto is that it's really important to do your research. So a lot of the work that I do
Mm-hmm.
is understanding which tokens are new, right?
Mm-hmm.
So trying to figure out, okay, what makes the token interesting, right? A new
Yeah.
cryptocurrency token. What is the
Mm-hmm.
technology behind it, right?
Yeah.
What is the ecosystem around it? What can
Mm-hmm.
it actually enable, right?
Yes.
Is there a use case for it, a practical
Is
use
it
case?
not a mimi coin?
Yes, a meme coin, right? There's some that are just purely for entertainment and some that are not,
Yes.
right? So it's up to you to do your research and figure out what that looks like from an
Yes.
investor's lens, right? But I
Yeah.
always say to everybody, cryptocurrency is a wide variety of
Mm-hmm.
tokens, and it's up to you to research the individual tokens, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'll mention a few of the bigger ones. You can look into them. The ones that
Yes.
have been there for a much longer time. You're
Yeah.
looking at Bitcoin, which is some of the larger ones. You're looking at
Yeah.
Ethereum, which is a
Mm-hmm.
larger one. You can look at Solana. You can look
Mm-hmm.
at Cardano, right? These are some, and Litecoin as well. These are some of the bigger, more established cryptocurrencies that have a lot more history behind them. So look
Mm-hmm.
into them, figure out what it is that's interesting about the technology, and then ask yourself a question: how will this technology be used?
Yeah.
Right? Ask yourself that question and figure out, how you yourself could then potentially see people, interacting with the technology.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always say to people that technology is just a tool. The same way the
Yes.
internet is just a tool, we're talking via the internet right now. But,
Yes.
30 years ago, 35 years ago, when the internet first started, nobody knew that you could transact on the internet and do e-commerce purchases. But Jeff
True.
Bezos realized that, hey, this is a platform, right? If I
It's
can
now
build a
worth
marketplace,
billions.
yeah, if I can build a marketplace where people can access this platform, then
Mm-hmm.
I can start to build a community, right? And
Yeah.
a business around this concept of being able to access things online. So cryptocurrency is going to go through its own evolution. Nobody knows what the future holds. But I
Yeah.
believe that if you focus on understanding the use cases, you're
Yeah.
more likely to succeed than somebody who's just purely speculating.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree with you because for me, I like to have a very small position on crypto, maybe, not a lot of money, because it is very volatile. So
Mhm.
if I lose money, that money it's not really going to affect the overall, portfolio that I have because I like to be conservative. I don't like to gamble with my money. And also another thing is trading and investing are different things. Trading,
Agreed.
you are basically probably buying for a few seconds or one day, which
Hmm.
is day trading. And swing trading, you are buying, for a couple of, days or weeks or months and then selling
Hmm.
with the expectation of selling for a profit. So
Right.
now it doesn't always go as predicted because there are a lot of fundamentals, technicals, and a lot of unknown variables.
Sure.
Each time that I try to, I make a decision, I don't like to say to myself I can forecast the future. I want to control the behavioral aspect of my investing. In other words, consistently focusing on things that I can control. That is the money that I can consistently invest, and also the specific securities that I put my money in. So I do my homework. So those
Hmm.
are the things that I can control. How much I get as a return on investment, I have no control over. But I can also control the amount of time that I can let my money compound.
Hmm.
That's just the way that I do when I do my investing. Now I want you, my audience, to hear more about Kuzi. But in conclusion, Kuzi, is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience, or something that you can kind of, put across so that in as a parting shot, or anything that you want
For
to
sure.
have
There's a
in
couple
this
of things I'll
conversation?
mention. So first thing I'll
Sure.
mention is that It's really important, like I mentioned before, to just do your research, right? Investing and saving money. Okay, so let's start with saving money and then we'll go to investing.
Yes,
Saving money is 90% behavior, 10% knowledge, right?
exactly.
So what I've learned is, even for myself, I'm somebody who likes to travel a lot.
Yes.
Traveling is not necessarily the best decision when it comes to saving, because the more you
Hmm.
travel, the more unexpected
Spend.
things happen, the more likely you're
Yeah.
going to spend on experiences, people,
Hmm.
flights, you name it, right? So there's a
Hmm.
cost to an
Yeah. Trade
experience.
off.
But exactly, there's a trade-off for every single decision you make. So you must be very conscious about your behaviors, the things
Hmm.
you like, right?
Yes.
And what it is that allows you to live a fulfilling life,
A
right?
rich life, so to
Yes,
say.
as Ramit Sethi would say, I'm a big fan of his
Yes.
podcast.
Hmm.
So Ramit talks about cutting costs in areas that are not as important to you, and then
Hmm.
focusing more on the areas that are important to you. And for everybody, that's different. For some people, they love cars and road trips. For some people, they love travel, like myself.
Hmm.
For some people, they love reading a good book and maybe not traveling as much, and they love working
Yes.
with the stock market. Everybody's different, or maybe watching a good movie. So
Yes.
everybody's different. It's really important to know yourself and know
Hmm.
what it is that your goals are. Once you know your goals, you can pattern your behaviors towards those goals. The other
Hmm.
thing is, it's important to be consistent,
Hmm.
right? There's
Yeah.
no such thing as an inconsistent investor that becomes very successful, right?
Yes.
You must, if you're going to save and invest every single 2 weeks or every month, you have to do it every month or every 2 weeks. Make sure you do it, and make sure that any money you get, right? Any money you receive, any income, pay
Hmm.
yourself first. Always put a
Yes.
little bit of money aside, even if it's 10%. Put it aside, because the future you will thank yourself for doing that. Save it,
Exactly.
invest it, and watch it grow. So always put aside a little bit of money for yourself. And obviously, if your income is growing, then you can put aside more and more money. But make sure that your expenses do not overtake your income, right?
Yeah.
That's a big piece of it. It's very, very important, because
Hmm.
over time, it's like a snowball, right?
Exactly.
And I highly recommend you read that book about Warren Buffett, The Snowball. It kind of speaks to how he was able to build his career. It's about consistency over time. A lot of people
Yeah.
don't realize this, but Buffett is almost 90 now. He's 90 years old, I believe,
Yeah.
right?
Almost 94, somewhere
Yes.
there.
But Buffett became notable for his investing career
Hmm.
after the age of 55, I believe, was when people
Yeah.
started really knowing him. So for the first
Hmm.
50 years, give or take, when he learned about stocks and was
It's just
investing,
a millionaire.
he was being consistent, but he was
Yeah.
basically growing his knowledge base and he
Yeah.
was learning, right? So that consistency over time is what made him the superstar that he is now. It was
Hmm.
consistency over time, right?
Yeah.
He never stopped investing, he never stopped reading, he never stopped
Yeah.
learning, he never stopped saving.
Hmm.
So all those things turned him into what he is now. People
Yeah.
forget that what you see is the finished product. You don't see
Yeah.
all the work that it took to get
Yes.
there. So focus
Yes.
on a diligent process, and you're
Hmm.
more likely to end up with an outcome that's reasonable. So just focus on a consistent process, and that'll take you far.
Yeah, thanks, Kuzi. And I like to just to add on a closing note is I was lucky that I managed to attend the Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting this year in May in Omaha, Nebraska. And one of the things that I learned is that you know there were a lot of people from all over the world. Another guy I met when I was waiting for my Uber was from the UK.
Hmm.
He told me that he actually paid a hotel for $700 a night. Of course, he did things last minute, and that's his choice, of course. I'm not judging. But the idea is there were people from all over the world who, just came to network, but also more important to listen to him, to his wisdom, right? Of course, people could watch it online, but the experience and the networking of that, because a lot of people, notable people, including Tim Cook, I think Bill Gates was also there. They were
Hmm.
in the room, just networking and also listening. So it's very, very key to make sure that you educate yourself. It takes time, but it can be reading a book. Now there's internet, so that is very, very important. I never want to invest or put my money on things that I don't understand. I would rather not invest, not take that risk. So otherwise, it becomes a speculation, and it's like you're flying blind. Imagine if the airplane was just, flying blind without what do you call this?
Navigation.
The compass. Yeah, the navigation, right? So that's similar to that, metaphorically. So I think at the end of the day, whatever I do, I want to make sure that I learn from other people. Hence the reason why I started this podcast. So Kuzi, I know we can talk and talk and talk and talk again, but in conclusion, what's your parting shot again?
My parting shot is save, invest, and be consistent, right? And at the end of the day, it's 90% of it is behavior, 10% of it
Yeah.
is 10 to 20% of it is knowledge, right? So arm yourself with knowledge, learn as much as you can, but it's about your consistency over time that'll make the biggest difference, right? And
Mhm.
find a way to pay yourself first, right?
Yes.
Whatever money you make, set a little bit of money aside. Make sure that
Hmm.
you take care of yourself because saving and investing is a habit, right? It's
Yes.
not a specific act, it's a habit. So it's about
Yes.
consistently doing it.
Hmm.
And the future you will thank you.
Yeah, and also live life, don't forget to live in the present as well, but just maintain a balance. And of course, that's your choice. I hope the audience, you have learned quite a lot from my good friend here, Kuzi. Thank you so much, Kuzi, for your time, the privilege of your time. I know you're a very super busy man. So thank you so much. I hope in the future we'll be able to invite you back to the podcast. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, Isaac. It was a pleasure.
Okay, no problem.